Thank you, my friend. Madam Speaker, I now yield to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Madam Speaker, I rise today on behalf of families who will enjoy Thanksgiving with their loved ones next week. This American tradition is an opportunity to give thanks for all our many blessings. Yet through no fault of their own, millions of hardworking families are struggling to count their blessings this year. Thanks to liberal policies enacted by the Biden administration and congressional Democrats, inflation is soaring. Gas prices have spiked more than 50%, and supply chain disruptions are leaving store shelves empty. The cost of Thanksgiving dinner this year will be the highest in history, and it will cost more for folks to drive or fly to spend their holidays with loved ones. American families are hurting. My Democrat colleagues and their liberal elite mouthpieces in the media claim to be champions of the poor and the working class. Yet an NBC correspondent claims it's a dirty little secret that Americans can afford to pay more for their groceries because they saved money when they were trapped in their homes during the COVID pandemic. She also had the audacity to say that because more than half of Americans are invested in the stock market and it's been doing well, that most people are actually better off now. How out of touch can she be? First, clearly she has zero regard for the half of the country that isn't fortunate enough to have a stock portfolio. Second, good luck trying to eat your 401k for Thanksgiving. Those are designed for retirement, so tax penalties for early withdrawals are harsh. Here's the real dirty little secret. She knows that, but she's so beholden to the left that she's willing to provide them free cover. Washington Post and Bloomberg op-ed writers are telling us we should lower our expectations and live more like Europeans by simply getting used to the idea of empty store shelves. These out-of-touch elites are channeling a let-them-eat-cake mentality while American families are suffering. Recent elections have shown that Americans reject these attempts to fundamentally change our nation from a prosperous environmental country into a suffering socialist regime. Inflation, intrusive government regulations, and overreaching policies have left American families with less money and limited buying power. No American should ever have to lower their expectations while living in the most prosperous country in the world. As Americans, we're blessed to live in a country where we're free to pursue economic prosperity, even during difficult times. Many of the economic challenges faced by American families today were created by the policies of an out-of-touch, liberal ruling class. Yet we stand on the brink of ramming through the largest and most expensive tax and spend initiative in history. It reminds me of the final scene in the movie Thelma and Louise, when the lead characters drive their car off a cliff rather than face the consequences of their actions. Democrat Party leaders are willing to figuratively drive our country off the cliff if that's what it takes to pass the Build Back Broke program in an electric car, I'm sure. As we prepare to celebrate Thanksgiving, I ask my Democrat colleagues and media elites to take a long, hard look at what their policies are doing to working-class Americans. Just say no. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I yield back.
Thank you, my friend. Madam Speaker, I now yield 2 minutes. The gentleman from Texas, Dr. Babbitt.
I want to thank my friend and colleague and neighbor from Louisiana across the Sabine River for having this tonight. Madam Speaker, it's been 10 months since Joe Biden took office, and look at the state of our country. Our southern border is eroding before our very eyes. Gas prices are skyrocketing. Inflation has gone up every month. Our currency is diminishing at an alarming rate. And now Americans are about to sit down to the most expensive Thanksgiving in history. How can anyone justify the fact that a bag of carrots, has a price tag 48% higher than just a year ago? My colleagues across the aisle know full well that every American is hurting because of their bad policies. They conveniently avoid the topic, telling people that inflation is actually a good thing. Give me a break. Try telling that to those hardworking Americans at the grocery store or at the gas pump now. What will it take for the left to finally come to their senses and say, no more? Is common sense and wisdom something of the past, outdated and disregarded? Democrats criticize us for telling the American people that they're destroying the country. They try to divert the American people's attention by censuring a Republican congressman over a cartoon. But I would ask them to simply look around. We're in a state of crisis and decay, and hardworking, law-abiding, freedom-loving Americans fear the inevitable outcome should we continue down this path. That outcome, what is it? Socialism, folks. Today, I ask my Democrat colleagues to look at the burden that they've put on the American people and face the fact that history has so clearly written a socialist utopia simply does not exist. And today, I ask them on behalf of every single American in this nation to find the courage and rise and say, enough. Thank you, and I yield back.
Reminder that socialism never works. It never has. It's a fool's errand. Madam Speaker, I now yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Rose.
Thank my colleague from Louisiana for the opportunity to address the House today. This week, President Biden signed into law the $1.2 trillion Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act, which focuses more on pushing Democrats' far-left socialist policies than on America's crumbling infrastructure needs. Madam Speaker, the signing of this bill comes on the heels of Democrats' reckless taxing and spending spree and senseless policies that have created an economic crisis of monumental proportions. As the Biden administration takes a victory lap, the American people are in no mood to celebrate. Inflation is at a 30-year high, and as prices on everything are more now than they were just 1 year ago. Gas is up 49%, beef is up 20%, home heating bills are up 28.1%. Under the Biden administration, working families are getting crushed. Increased costs at the grocery store and the gas pump and higher home heating bills are squeezing Americans dry. Skyrocketing inflation is driving down real wages for hardworking middle-class families and making it more difficult for those living on fixed budgets to make ends meet. Instead of addressing the root cause of inflation, which, by the way, and for the record, is largely caused by out-of-control government spending, House Democrats are continuing to push their sweeping $1.75 trillion Build Back Broke Act. This package would once again hand out cash to households and create new paid leave benefits with no expectation of work. However, as we all know, an engaged workforce is key to invigorating economic recovery and slowing inflation. Make no mistake, wasteful and increased spending by Democrats, much of which is being funded by even more borrowed money, won't slow inflation. It will supercharge it. I strongly urge President Biden and Democrats in Congress to reconsider the devastating economic consequences they are proposing to enact. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, my friend, and you're so right about that. The hardworking American families are feeling the pain from Tennessee all the way to California. With that, Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to my good friend, Mr. Obernolte.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Speaker, I rise tonight deeply concerned that this body is scheduling a vote on what will likely be the most expensive spending package in the history of the United States without knowing the true cost of that package. Our own House rules, House Rule 13, requires us to wait for a score from the Congressional Budget Office before voting on a budget bill. And the Budget Reconciliation and Impoundment Control Act of 1974 requires the CBO to issue that score. But unfortunately, we are rushing through this vote without even knowing the true cost of the bill. Last week, I led a group of almost half of the House of Representatives in sending a letter to the Speaker urging her not to vote on this bill until its true costs are known. I'm sure most Americans saw the President of the United States go on television 2 weeks ago and tell the American public that this spending bill will not add a single dollar to the national deficit. And our response to that is, if that's the case, Mr. President, prove it. Prove it by waiting for the CBO to issue a score on that bill. The reason why we are so concerned about this issue is that any economist will tell you that deficit government spending is dangerously inflationary. And we are already seeing the highest inflation in the United States in over 40 years. Folks in my district are paying over $20 more today to fill the gasoline tank on their cars just to go to work than they were just a year ago. This inflation is hurting everyday Americans, and it will hurt them more if this bill spends more than it takes in taxes, and every indication is that it will. Madam Speaker, I urge this body to wait for the Congressional Budget Office to score this bill before voting on it. It's the responsible thing to do. Anything less would be an abdication of our responsibility to the people that we represent. I yield back.
Thank you, my friend. Madam Speaker, delighted to yield the gentleman from New Jersey. Oh, he's right behind me. 2 minutes to Mr. Van Drew.
I thank the gentleman from Louisiana for doing this and for yielding and all of his good work. I rise today, a week before one of America's oldest, most deeply rooted holidays, ashamed of what this administration is doing to our great United States of America. American families look forward to a Thanksgiving feast where they are finally able to see distant relatives, reflect on their lives, and of course, share a table covered in food made from old family recipes. Yet this year, families aren't thinking about that. They're not thinking about what they'll cook, but rather how they will afford a Thanksgiving meal. Turkey prices are up 18%, pumpkin pies up 17%, carrots, strangely enough, up 50%. Some families might not even have to worry about these rising food costs because they might not be able to travel to see their families due to soaring gas prices. A gallon of gas is up 61% on average. If they are able to travel despite the price increases, they may enter a frigid home, as the cost to heat our homes has increased by 54%. The root cause of these price increases is no big secret to anyone. They are the direct result of failed Biden policies. Policies that have led to rampant inflation, a crippled supply chain, and labor shortages on a scale that we never would have ever imagined. Despite recent comments made by this administration and the media, inflation is a bad, bad thing. Buying a home, more expensive. Building a home, more expensive. Renting an apartment, more expensive. Gas, groceries, turkeys, and presents, more expensive. This is the Biden Thanksgiving tax. Americans deserve a joyous Thanksgiving after the suffering our nation has endured over the past 2 years. And this administration is on track to be known as the Grinch who not only stole Christmas, but the Grinch that stole Thanksgiving as well. I yield back.
Thank you, Doc. Appreciate those comments. Madam Speaker, I'm delighted to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Lieutenant Colonel Pfluger.
Thank you to my colleague from Louisiana. Madam Speaker, I rise today to address a very important issue in our country, crisis after crisis after crisis that we see, including last week where the President gathered with world leaders to discuss a fairy tale climate agenda that will literally dismantle America's energy security, which is part of our national security. If we continue down this path, all Americans should worry about one thing: where is our energy going to come from? We're told that we must dismantle the American oil and gas production to save the planet, but in 2019, U.S. harmful emissions were 13% less than they were in 2005. 13% less. No other country has cut their footprint more in that short amount of time. And what's responsible for this? Well, it's not electric vehicles. It's not unreliable energy sources. It's the American shale revolution. Clean burning natural gas is critical in allowing us to achieve affordable, reliable energy supply without the harmful emissions and the increases like we see from major polluters like Russia and China. But instead of building on that progress, President Biden and Democrats are crippling the American energy sector and emboldening our foreign adversaries. I'm proud to represent the men and women of the Permian Basin and the job that they do to keep the lights on, to make sure that we have that affordable, reliable energy and that it's running every single day. It's time to put Midland over Moscow. Any vote for reconciliation might as well be a vote for Russia. I'm urging my colleagues to vote no. And with that, Madam Speaker, I yield back.
Thank you, my friend. Midland over Moscow. We ought to print T-shirts with that one. Madam Speaker, now yield the gentleman from Tennessee, where they're deeply concerned about all this as well. Mr. Burgess.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Johnson, for yielding to me and the adequate job that you're doing. I recently overheard some East Tennesseans talking, Madam Speaker, at the gas pumps at the local pilot station, and a fellow said, it's almost like these politicians want to make gas more expensive. Well, I think my constituents are on to something, Madam Speaker, Vice Chairman Johnson. Conversations like this one I've heard at my local pilot station have been happening everywhere, all across this country. Americans are so displeased with gas prices, they're slapping these Biden "I did that" stickers on the pumps. Now, I don't recommend doing that, but it seems to me somebody's taking the initiative to do it. Joe Biden's war against affordable energy is hurting millions of Americans' ability to travel, Madam Speaker. Commutes to work, family road trips, trips to the park, airline travel, all are soaring in costs. The White House lacks any and all sympathy for what this crisis means for working Americans. Joe Biden's energy secretary even laughed when asked how her department planned to stabilize gas prices. I thought that was the ultimate act of arrogance. It's the let them eat cake too kind of thing. I guess this is easy for Joe Biden and his cabinet to ignore. American taxpayers fund all their travel in those fancy private cars and jet airplanes they fly around in. Their attitude is insulting, Madam Speaker, and it's arrogant. No wonder Joe Biden is blind to what is going on. He never sees a bill for any of it, not a dadgum bit. The holiday season is right around the corner. People are going to be celebrating Hanukkah and Christmas, and I predict holiday travel this year will be the most expensive on record. Americans will have Joe Biden and his war on affordable energy to thank for their enormous travel expenses. Thank you, Vice Chairman Johnson. I yield back the remainder of my time, and I appreciate the adequate work you're doing.
And your adequate comments are more than that. And I'll tell you what, they're going to have to amend and print new stickers for the gas pumps, because if our Democrat colleagues vote for this monstrosity, they're going to have to make a new sticker that says, "I and the House Democrats did that." That's what's going down. Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heiss.
I thank my friend from Louisiana, and that's exactly true. The House Democrats have done this. It's all one big party. And while we are going to be celebrating Thanksgiving next week, families gathered together giving thanks, I am absolutely confident there will not be one family in America giving thanks for the economic crisis created by President Joe Biden and the Democrats, the crisis economically that they are serving the American people. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, this is going to be the most expensive Thanksgiving in history. From turkey to potatoes, pumpkin pie, you name it, this is going to be the most expensive Thanksgiving ever. Probably a whole lot fewer second trips for food, or thirds, or whatever your family is accustomed to. Meanwhile, what is the answer that our Democrat friends are giving us? Democrats here in Washington have a great solution. Let's spend trillions of more dollars. Let's make inflation go up even more. Let's put more pain and suffering around the Thanksgiving tables and the pocketbooks of the American people. While Americans are pinching their pennies, literally, to live within their means, President Biden and his socialist cronies on the other side of the aisle here in Washington are wanting to spend even more of the hard-earned money of the American taxpayer and the American worker. The Democrats' socialist gravy train has left the station, and the American people, I assure you, are not at the table. They are not on board with what's happening in this country. Americans are the one paying the price for this. They are paying the price for President Biden's budget-busting policies. More money at the gas pumps, more money at Thanksgiving table this year, more money for everyday goods. We can go down the list. It's high time, it's past time that President Biden and the Democrats stop this reckless runaway spending. Our economy cannot afford trillions of more dollars that we don't have for unnecessary spending, for socialist, Marxist spending, robbing us not only of our hard-earned income, but our liberties, our freedoms that we love and cherish in this country. It's time that we put a stop to this nonsense, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you, my friend. And that voice from Georgia is so strong, I think we're going to stick with that theme. I'll yield to another gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Clyde.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Johnson. Madam Speaker, too many falsehoods have been spread about the Democrats' multi-trillion-dollar tax and spend bill, the most radical and expensive piece of legislation in our history. The American people deserve to know the truth about the grave ramifications of passing this fiscally irresponsible liberal wish list. So let's unpack some of these egregious Pinocchios. For starters, the left has erroneously claimed that the so-called Build Back Better Act is fully paid for and will cost American taxpayers $0. This is false. While we have not yet received the official CBO score, models show that the Biden big government socialist spending package could cost more than double what Democrats have previously reported. The number could be upwards of $4.5 trillion, with $3 trillion of it being in new debt. Additionally, President Biden has touted for months that this legislation will not raise taxes on Americans earning less than $400,000 a year. According to early reports from the Congressional Budget Office, this is completely false as well. A recent analysis from the Tax Policy Center found that the reckless reconciliation bill will hike taxes for 20 to 30% of middle-class families next year. Yet taxpayers in the top 5% will see a combined total tax cut of $32 billion. What a slap in the face to the millions of small businesses, hardworking employees, and their families. Lastly, the President and his Democrat allies have absurdly stated that passing their pricey package will help ease inflation. Ease inflation? Really? This is completely illogical and defies all reason, unless, of course, your intent is to deceive. Injecting trillions of dollars of borrowed federal money into the economy, with billions of it going to climate change, will only worsen the already burdensome effects of record-high inflation. The result will be Americans struggling to afford gas, groceries, and heating bills. Keep in mind, the sole intent of the Biden-Bernie Bankruptcy Act's enormous cost is to fund unpopular and radical policies such as taxpayer-funded abortion, weaponizing the IRS, and mass amnesty for illegal migrants. Oh, and don't forget about the 150-plus new government programs that will further expand the federal government's size and scope. Simply put, the unfortunate truth is that by ramming through their big government socialist spending spree, Democrats are selfishly prioritizing their dangerous far-left agenda over the needs of the American people. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, my friend. Appreciate those comments. And Madam Speaker, I now yield 2 minutes. The gentleman from Alabama, sticking with our Southern theme, Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. I appreciate your leadership on this. Madam Speaker, I rise alarmed at the unprecedented wasteful spending from Washington that is fueling inflation and risking the future of our republic. Just last week, this Congress passed a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill. Despite the bill's characterization, less than 10% went to traditional, what us Southerners and common sense people call roads and bridges. But $200 million went back to a park in Speaker Pelosi's own backyard. According to the New York Times, certainly not an ally of the Republicans, said the Democrats' reconciliation bill before us this week includes, and I want to quote, $4.1 billion tax break for people who buy electric bicycles, $2.5 billion for tree equity, not sure what that is, and another $2.5 billion to help the contingency fee lawyers recoup expenses. Madam Speaker, this captures exactly what is wrong with Washington. Too many politicians up here will gladly endorse trillions in new spending for a few pennies of pork to come back to their district. They put their political futures above our own nation. Well, I'm sick of it. The American people are too. Congress is bleeding the American people dry with waste and pet projects it claims is being spent in their own best interest. Sure, I would love for the federal government to build a new road in my district, but I refuse to sacrifice the health and viability of this nation to get it. And most patriotic Americans would agree with me. Roads and bridges come and go, but if we foolishly squander the nation of our forefathers that they fought so hard to create, we will selfishly allow this great American experiment to die because of our own greed. Shame on us, because we will have ultimately failed those who elected us and sent us here to protect their best interest. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, my friend. That's so well said. And another plain-spoken Southerner I'll bring up from the state of Georgia, Mr. Carter, 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Speaker, the spending spree continues this week as Democrats continue to try and ram their ridiculous reconciliation bill down our throats. The radicals have been backseat driving far too long. Our holiday cheer is now being threatened by this administration's refusal to cut up the credit cards. It's truly astonishing. We're all set to experience the most expensive Thanksgiving in our country's history, thanks to these reckless spending habits perpetrated by the White House. Turkey prices up 27%, potatoes up 13%, carrots up 47%, and the beloved pumpkin pie from Costco up 17%. The Consumer Price Index is up 6.2% overall. This is an indicator of how much extra people are having to pay for their goods. In addition, natural gas up 40%, home heating oil up 60%. Americans are being forced to pay more to heat their homes in a time when the weather is at its coldest. Nowhere in America should hardworking taxpayers have to choose between heating their home and putting food on the table. These are not pandemic-related issues anymore. They are government-created issues. This is what socialism looks like, and Joe Biden says, get used to it. Empty shelves, runaway inflation, and government control. This no longer looks like America. It looks like a failed socialist nation. That's what it looks like. We will not cave to the desires of the far left. We will push back. America will remain free, and we will prevail. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Now yield back.
Thank you for that optimistic close. As Reagan said, we are the last best hope of man on earth. We better hold it. Madam Speaker, I'm delighted to yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Miller.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. The only thing President Biden, Speaker Pelosi, and the Democrats in Congress will be building back better is China's economy. Truly, they are building Beijing back better. A new report released today shows that China has officially surpassed the U.S. as the richest nation in the world because Congress gave China most favored nation status under the Clinton administration. They've definitely tipped the scales for Chinese manufacturing. D.C. politicians themselves have been enriched off of China while the American middle class suffers. Now, Democrats are pushing the Green New Deal policies that will make the middle class suffer even more with higher gas prices and home heating bills this winter. Biden's policies enrich China because they manufacture solar panels, lithium batteries, and windmills, and taxpayers are going to be forced to subsidize this. China mines these minerals for batteries and solar panels with child labor and slave labor. When asked about the slave labor behind the Green New Deal, John Kerry said it was, quote, not my lane. That's despicable. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, my friend. It is a shame that China is being assisted by these Democrat policies, even as they openly challenge us. And another thing Ronald Reagan warned us about is that weakness invites aggression. This is a dangerous game. Madam Speaker, I'm delighted to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Bentz.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Speaker, American families and businesses across our country are facing a crisis of inflation, the likes of which we have not seen for more than 30 years. Just last month, the Consumer Price Index hit a 30-year high. What does this mean for everyday Americans? Gas prices up 50% from last year. Food prices rising to the highest level in 12 years. The price of eggs up 42%. The price of milk up 17%. The price of a new car up $5,000. And home prices going through the roof. Last week, I met with farmers and ranchers in Central Oregon who are paying far more for fertilizer, feed, fuel, herbicides, and all crop inputs. And this on top of the incredible difficulties caused by historic drought, supply chain disruptions, and a shocking shortage of labor. Given all this, what are President Biden and Speaker Pelosi doing to address the biggest inflationary spike in decades? Well, they have no plan, except to spend even more trillions of our tax dollars on more and probably irreversible welfare programs. The $2 trillion spending bill will raise taxes, increase our national debt, and drive inflation even higher. Sadly, American families will pay for this bill one way or another, but almost immediately right now through inflated prices on everything from diesel fuel to the Thanksgiving turkey. The $2 trillion Build Back Better bill is on top of the $1.9 trillion spent in March and the $1.2 trillion spent just a few weeks ago. Even former officials from the Obama administration have publicly warned that these unprecedented levels of spending will result in higher inflation, and American farmers are now warning that this spending bill could result in the demise of many family farms and ranches. Spending trillions upon trillions of dollars will cause more crippling inflation for American families and businesses. This radical reconciliation bill will not help us build back better. Instead, it will damage my state and our nation for generations to come. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Bentz. It will damage your state and all of our states. We have another friend. I'll yield 2 minutes to. The gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Kustoff.
Thank you, and I want to thank my friend from Louisiana for arranging the time to talk to the nation today about these very important issues. And I rise today to talk about the reckless spending plans put forward by Democrats, which I think without a doubt have put our country in a real economic crisis. Let me take you back to March, when along purely partisan lines, Democrats pushed through a $1.9 trillion spending plan. Then just 2 weeks ago, Democrats pushed through another $1.2 trillion in spending. Now this week, we may likely vote on the Democrats' social spending plan, which would drive the total spending to almost $5 trillion when you add together all three of these spending bills. Now, if you will, focus for a moment on the runaway inflation that's really been exasperated and inflamed by this massive spending. It was reported just last week that the Consumer Price Index, which measures this data, rose over 6%. That's the highest level in 30 years. That means that the price of everyday goods has skyrocketed. And I'm talking about everything: cars, appliances, food, gas. You know, estimates are that the price to heat your home this winter could be 54% higher this year compared to last winter. Americans, really our constituents, they're getting hit really hard financially, and there's no end to it in sight. Without a doubt, the huge social spending bill that we may vote on this week will leave severe and long-lasting consequences. I want to point you to a story that ran yesterday in the Washington Times. Here's the headline: Biden's social welfare bill breaks pledge not to raise taxes on people making less than $400,000. The newspaper cites the Joint Committee on Taxation. Now here's the deal. With the social spending bill beginning in 2023, taxpayers making between $50,000 and $75,000 annually would see a tax increase. For people earning between $75,000 and $100,000 a year, the tax increase 2.9%. Folks making between $100,000 and $200,000 per year would see a tax increase of 7.4% in 2023. To my colleagues, let's listen to our constituents. Let's focus on the real world problems that they're dealing with every day and that they talk to us about. Let's work on the supply chain. Let's focus on the threat to China. Let's stop this massive spending. And with that, I appreciate it and I yield back.
I thank my friend for prosecuting the case. That was his background. Madam Speaker, may I inquire how much time is remaining in the hour?
The gentleman has 20½ minutes remaining.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'm delighted to yield the gentlelady from Oklahoma, Ms. Bice.
Thank you. I ask unanimous consent to address the House for up to 2 minutes. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to address the record-breaking inflation that will make next Thursday the most expensive Thanksgiving in history due to Biden and Democrats' detrimental policy decisions. The American people will feel the impact of rising inflation this Thanksgiving and holiday season. Prices of ingredients for the traditional Thanksgiving dinner are sky high, with turkey costs up 27%, pumpkin pie 17%, and carrots up 47%. Beyond the pricey meal, travel costs are surging because a gallon of gas costs 61% more than a year ago, and airfare is expected to increase 18%, placing a burden on families to visit loved ones for the holidays. On top of this, simply staying warm this winter will cost more. Heating bills are projected to rise as much as 54% compared to last winter. While these everyday prices are skyrocketing, wages are stagnant, which means decreased purchasing power for hardworking Americans. Not only will they have less money to spend on Thanksgiving traditions and holiday gifts that will have a damaging impact on small businesses and our overall economy, but the livelihood of Americans will be harmed by the difficulty to afford day-to-day necessities. Madam Speaker, Biden's failed policies are hitting home. As shown through the significant drop in his approval rating, Americans are desperate for a solution to fix these insane price increases. Instead, what is Biden's response? Continue to push the partisan reconciliation bill that would pump the economy with trillions more dollars in spending for social programs that are not paid for, further exacerbating this inflation crisis and causing American taxpayers to suffer the effects for generations to come. There are grave consequences to careless actions. I urge my colleagues and the American people to recognize this Thanksgiving as a direct result of excessive government spending and shutting down our country's energy production. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back.
Thank you, my friend. That's very well said. Madam Speaker, I'm delighted to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman.
Thank you. I'd like one more time to address the reconciliation package. We know that it's a very large spending package and will result in more welfare and inevitably have to have more taxes, which will put a damper on the economy. But let's look at the type of vision the Democrat Party has for our country, given what they're spending the money on. We know we have a big illegal immigration crisis in this country, right? Everybody knows 8,000 people in the country last July, 105,000 this July. What are we going to do with it? And we have record numbers, record amounts of fentanyl coming across the southern border. We respond with a provision giving 7 million people a path to amnesty, which is a magnet to get more people here. We make it more difficult to remove people from the country if they commit crimes, including sex offenses and firearm convictions, without any discretion from DHS. So you want to make it more difficult to get even the criminal element out of the country. But finally, we promise anybody coming in the country free college. Pell Grants designed for poor Americans are going to go to people who come here illegally. We want the average American to sit there at home paying $30,000 or $40,000 tuition in debt until they're 30 or 40 years old. But you come here illegally, boom, free college. The second thing we get out of here is I think we have a welfare problem in this country. We're encouraging people not to work. We're encouraging people not to get married. How do they respond? Be it looking at the recent increase in food share benefits, the massive amount of money going to low-income housing, the increase in earned income tax credit, the larger Pell Grants. Everywhere you look in this bill, it's more money for people of a certain lifestyle at the expense of the person who is getting married and working harder. Race preferences. Throughout this bill, it seems like they're incapable of doing a program that benefits all Americans. It's always targeting somebody from this race or this gender or that gender. Very divisive bill. Greatly increase the government's role in raising the children, as the government pays for all the 3- and 4-year-old kids. Kind of the opposite of what America is supposed to be, where the child's upbringing is family-centered. Now we want to make the child's upbringing government-centered. And finally, a more surveillance state. 87,000 new IRS agents. What could they possibly do? But obviously you can see where we're headed as a country at a time where our factories and farms can't find anybody to work. We're going to take all the unemployed people and make them IRS agents. In any event, I urge America to pay attention where this money is going in this bill, because it's a type of America our forefathers never would have imagined. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend. There's so much common sense there, and we will continue with that theme. I'm happy, Madam Speaker, to yield 2 minutes to a gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Baird.
I want to thank my colleague for giving me the opportunity to speak. And Madam Speaker, at a time when Americans are facing the highest inflation rates in decades, and small businesses are struggling to recover from the devastating impact of COVID-19, House Democrats will soon consider the most radical spending package in American history. Unfortunately, instead of giving families and businesses a hand up by getting able-bodied Americans back to work and taking steps to resolve our supply chain issues, Democrats' far-left socialist package will do little than to exacerbate our inflation crisis and harm the growth of small businesses. Earlier this month, the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Business released a model that found the bill will cost more than twice the estimated cost. If that's not bad enough, the Tax Policy Center recently found that this spending spree would raise taxes on middle-class Americans by up to 30%. This anti-growth package will destroy thousands of jobs, burden many business owners with restrictive taxes intended to pay and to help pay for this bloated spending bill, and will surely be a death knell for many businesses on a struggling Main Street and hardworking Americans struggling to contend with soaring inflation rates. Month after month, we've watched the Biden administration deliver disappointing jobs reported, with the labor force participation rate falling to 61.6% in September alone. This labor shortage is only fueling our economy and our economic supply chain crisis. But instead of encouraging Americans to get back to work, President Biden and House Democrats are including provisions that discourage unemployed Americans from finding a job. If Democrats really want to build back better, they should be championing policies that actually help our small business owners and the middle class, not exacerbating the problems they're struggling to overcome. Yield back.
Thank you, my friend. Anytime a Bronze Star and Purple Heart recipient speaks, we ought to listen. Madam Speaker, I'm delighted to yield next to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Klein.
I want to thank my friend for yielding and for sponsoring this evening's special order. Madam Speaker, this week the Labor Department's Consumer Price Index jumped 6.2% in October from a year earlier, reflecting an increase in the cost of goods and services as well as energy and food. Fuel costs surged 30%. And I have a quote from someone here in Washington about that. This politician said, "By all accounts, the threat posed by record inflation to the American people is not transitory and is instead getting worse. From the grocery store to the gas pump, Americans know the inflation tax is real, and D.C. can no longer ignore the economic pain Americans feel every day." Now, that wasn't my colleague, Congressman Johnson. That wasn't Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy or Congressman Jim Jordan. No, that was Senator Joe Manchin who said that just today. He's recognizing that not just West Virginians, but all Americans are feeling the pain at the pump, at the grocery store, and all across the economy. And it's coming from legislation that our president pushed earlier this year and that House Democrats helped get behind, the so-called American Rescue Plan. No less than our president himself said about public frustration. People are feeling it. They're feeling it. Did you ever think you'd be paying this much for a gallon of gas? In some parts of California, they're paying $4.50 a gallon. That's why it's so important we do everything in our power to stabilize the supply chain. But what he did through passage of this American Rescue Plan is actually cause inflation to jump that much further forward. And he conceded on Wednesday that inflation is at a 3-decade high because, quote, people have more money now as a result of the $1.9 trillion stimulus legislation. And what does he propose to do now? Double down and spend an additional $2 trillion. What does he think that will do to inflation in this country, Madam Speaker? He has already said that, quote, the irony is people have more money now because of the first major piece of legislation that I passed. You all got checks for $1,400. You got checks for a whole range of things. It changes people's lives, but what happens if there's nothing to buy and you got more money to compete for getting goods? It creates a real problem, Biden said. He did say that, and it did create a real problem. It creates a problem to the tune of inflation rates at a 30-year high and gas prices up 61% from last year. So if the president recognizes that his last multi-trillion-dollar bill caused the economic peril we're facing, then why is he proposing spending an additional $2 trillion on social programs we don't need and can't afford? 150 new government programs. Propping up the Green New Deal won't solve the economic crisis. Weaponizing the IRS against Americans won't lower inflation. Taxing middle-class families won't put more money into people's pockets. You know what would actually help get this country's economy back on track? Fiscal responsibility. Americans want a Thanksgiving meal that won't be the most expensive in the history of the holiday, not a progressive wish list that will only make the situation worse. And I yield back to the gentleman. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend. We are going to feel the pain. You're exactly right. Madam Speaker, I'm happy to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Sessions.
Congressman Johnson, I want to thank you for this time. Madam Speaker, we're here to talk to the American people about ideas that roam across our nation. They're conversations that take place around every table. And next week at Thanksgiving, we will have those conversations at my table and others around the country. And you just heard a good discussion about inflation. But part of inflation comes from government spending. And part of government spending comes from policy that this president, this administration, the Democratic Party supports. 1.6 million people have come to our borders and come across, and we're doing the things that will encourage them to come here. We are doing the things that will encourage them to give them free education, free health care, to pay for them and to do those things. So, Madam Speaker, tonight we want to speak specifically about this thing that's called inflation. Inflation is related to federal monetary and fiscal policy. Inflation is that thing that occurs in the economy when the price of goods and services rise and rise exponentially. Normally, an administration would look at about a 2% growth, a 2% inflation rate, a 2% which would be, generally speaking, an acceptable growth for a GDP model as well as inflation rate. This administration, however, began with President Biden going down and visiting the king of inflation, former President Jimmy Carter, talking to this nation about how great Jimmy Carter's service was. Well, what he really meant to say is, I admired his policies, progressive, liberal policies that took this country to have 16 and 18% interest rates. interest rates that raised prices an excessive amount of money for families for a generation that could not buy homes. Madam Speaker, the Republican Party is here speaking, just as the American people are, and we recognize that this administration has made dear and great friends with the conditions that create inflationary spiral. This administration knows exactly, they have smart people there, but it's their policies that they demand to have, and those policies bring about results that end up making friends with inflation. Higher prices for goods and services, more government spending. This is big, expensive government spending across the board. And so the American people will have the most expensive Thanksgiving in years. The highest inflation rate in 30 years. Oh, that would be back to Jimmy Carter. No wonder President Biden visited his favorite or second favorite president, Jimmy Carter, because he wants to make friends with the conditions that create inflation. Big government spending, prices rising, government control of the goods and services, and just like Jimmy Carter, he had a Senate, a House, and a presidency to be very successful. Madam Speaker, the American people spoke again last night. In local elections down in South Carolina, they spoke a week ago in state elections. Madam Speaker, the American people deserve better. Better comes from policy, and better comes from adults who will recognize that it's not just politics, it's about the American people who want and need to have more take-home pay and more ability to take care of themselves, not big, expensive socialist government that even breaks the laws of this country. Congressman, I want to thank you for your service to this conference, but more importantly, for making sure that the American people hear the other side of the story. I yield back my time.
Thank you so much. So well said. And the American people are going to speak again next fall. We know that for certain. Madam Speaker, happy to yield an additional minute to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Clyde.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to honor the life and service of a Jackson County deputy, Lena Marshall, whose picture is displayed beside me right here. Last week, Jackson County lost a mother and a heroic law enforcement officer. After responding to a domestic call that spiraled into a violent shootout, Deputy Marshall tragically lost her life while serving to keep Georgians in our community safe. While I never had the privilege of meeting Deputy Marshall personally, I am deeply moved by her immeasurable sacrifice and willingness to put Georgians' safety above her own. As a resident of Jackson County myself, I believe I can speak for all of us in the county in saying that we are forever thankful for Deputy Marshall's dedication, her service, and her bravery. My wife Jennifer and I continue to pray for Lena's family and for fellow Jackson County officers during this difficult time. May God bless our men and women in blue who selflessly put their lives on the line every day to keep us safe. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, my friend. Sorry for that tragic loss. Madam Speaker, I'm happy to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, Ms. Lamofa.
Thank you to my colleague from Louisiana. I rise tonight as we talk about this issue with our upcoming Thanksgiving holiday, expected, of course, to be the most expensive meal in the history of that holiday. It's more proof that Democrats are driving up inflation with their spending policies. Spending piles of dollars does not create an economy. It actually hurts the value of the dollars. USDA's turkey market news report showed the price of turkey itself is going to be up 22% from last year. Pumpkin pie, potatoes, cranberries, all up in price. Inflation, of course, is the most regressive of actual taxes on the people because it hits those on the fixed income the hardest. Low and middle income have tough decisions to make on whether it's going to be how they're going to handle their food costs and the upcoming heating oil and gas to stay warm this winter. Democrats have been touting that they will tax billionaires and the rich and corporations, but instead we see them advocating for policies that lead to inflation, directly harming those low and middle income Americans, as well as making tax breaks for the rich while they're touting that. Congress cannot spend its way out of a problem, as some of the administration have suggested. It would only make the issue worse. We must stop passing massive spending bills, instead work on the burdensome regulations and get it out of businesses' way so they can thrive, expand their business, and hire employees. Indeed, we need to work on the important supply chain issues that are still clogging our ports, keeping our products from being exported, from agriculture, all those things that need to be shipped out. Instead, we aren't cutting very good deals with China when they can just send their stuff over to us. So that would insulate our economy from inflation by having a real economy at home that's not dependent upon borrowed dollars for big spending. Indeed, I keep asking, Biden administration, whose side are you on? Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, my friend, for those comments. Madam Speaker, how much time